I'm a really big fan of the Google Home Mini. I'm also a really big fan of the Google Home Max, but I'm not really the biggest fan of the original Google Home. It just doesn't sound good for listening to music, and I really think Google needs to release a redesigned Google Home with an emphasis on sound quality, because I really just use my Google Home for voice commands, and at which point I should really just replace it with another Google Home Mini. But if you're looking for a mid-sized smart speaker, I really think the Sony LF-S50G is a great alternative to the original Google Home. The Sony LF-S50G is Sony's first Google Assistant integrated smart speaker. When it was first released, it was retailing for $199.99, but now you can find it for $149.99 at most places. And even during the holiday season, I saw them for as low as $100. But still, if you get it for $149.99, it's just $20 more than the original Google Home. And it comes in two colors, black or white. If you want to pick up either of the speakers featured in this video, I'll have links in the description below. And if you use the link, it really helps out the channel. Okay, let's go over the obvious. Yes, the Sony looks almost exactly like an Apple HomePod, and personally, I don't mind it. It's smaller, a little slimmer, and much lighter than the HomePod, and it also has a fabric outer shell. But the Sony smart speaker is slightly bigger than the Google Home. Just like the Google Home, the Sony has 360-degree sound, but it also has an LED clock display, which is something I always thought the Google Home was missing, and instead of touch controls, the Sony uses gesture controls to control your music playback and activate Google Assistant. The only buttons this smart speaker has is a Bluetooth button, a mute button, and a dim button to lower the brightness of the clock display on the front. Unfortunately, the Sony LF-S50G doesn't have an aux jack. The only way to listen to music on this speaker is either through voice commands, if you cast it, or over Bluetooth. And there's also an NFC touchpoint on the back, so if you have an Android device, pairing is just a little easier. Now let's talk about the gesture controls, because those can be very hit or miss if they're not properly built into the product. If you swipe up, you'll play or pause your music. If you swipe down, you'll activate your Google Assistant. If you swipe right, you'll skip a track. And if you swipe left, you'll go back a track. And to adjust the volume, you just make clockwise or counterclockwise circles with your finger. In order for the swipes to work, your palm has to be flat, and in order to adjust the volume, the circles have to be directly over the Sony logo. And once you get the hang for the gestures, they work 9 out of 10 times. It's pretty good. I've been moving calm, started. Yeah. More. How's the weather like for New York City?
Currently in New York City, it's 42 and sunny.
Personally, one of my biggest gripes with the Google Home, Home Mini, and Home Max is that you can't physically control your music playback. Google forces you to use voice commands, and only the Google Home allows you to touch and hold to activate Google Assistant, whereas the Mini and Max, you're forced to use the hot word. Voice controls are cool and all, but sometimes using manual controls is just the simplest solution. And that's why I like the Sony speaker so much. I can simply use the voice commands, but if I want to, I also have full control with the gestures. And when it comes to voice recognition, the Sony smart speaker picks up my voice just as well as my Google Home and Home Mini. If you're playing music at a higher volume, then either of these speakers are going to have a problem hearing you. Hey Google, set studio lights to blue.
Sure, changing the studio light to blue.
Hey Google, talk to crypto prices.
Alright, getting crypto prices.
Hi, which cryptocurrency would you like the price for?
Bitcoin?
The current price of Bitcoin is $7,589.19.
Usually when using third-party Google Assistant smart speakers, it means not having all of the features found on the Google Home, Home Mini, and Max, most noticeably broadcasting and making phone calls. Broadcasting works just fine on this Sony speaker, but you can't make phone calls like you can with either of the first-party speakers. This feature could possibly come in a future software update. Okay, now let's talk about tech specs and speaker setup. The Sony LF-S50G is rocking Bluetooth 4.2 and has a stable connection up to 40 feet. It's pretty standard. It's IPX3 rated, so a little splash of water won't hurt it, and its fabric shell is removable. Inside, there's a single upward-facing 1.89-inch diameter speaker and a downward-facing 2.09-inch diameter subwoofer made into a bass reflux duct, and between the two, there's a diffuser that helps evenly spread out all of the sound. For comparison, the Google Home has a single frontward-facing 2-inch diameter transducer and dual 2-inch diameter passive radiators. Even though the Google Home is a 360-degree speaker, after living with it for a few months, it's still pretty directional. For the best sound quality, you want that transducer firing towards you.
You'll be mine when the tide has turned around. Just listen to the sound. Two hearts beating, beating time. Hey, yeah, hey, yeah, hey, yeah, hey, yeah. Time recognize you and your wicked ways.
Obviously, the JBL Pulse 3 is the best sounding speaker here. It has a far superior speaker setup. My problem with the Google Home is that it just has way too much bass and it ends up pushing back all of the mids and the vocals. I feel the Google Home is really only worth using if you're strictly going to be listening to EDM. The Sony, on the other hand, has a much more even sound signature. There's still a good amount of bass, but the mids and vocals are still very well defined. But the Sony still isn't perfect. There is a good amount of sound distortion if you get above the 85% volume mark. And when I first got this speaker, there was a good amount of reverb in the bass, but after a few days of playing music on this guy, it just went away. But even though I really do like Sony's first smart speaker, there is room for improvement. First up, I hate the included power cable. The cable itself is too short and cheap, and the plug itself is almost twice as big as the Google Home's. Something I've noticed lately with smart speakers is that their power cables are just as premium as the speaker themselves. All of Google's cables are covered in soft touch rubber, Minis and Max's plugs are very small, and the HomePod's cable is covered in fabric. This is the same issue I have with the JBL Link 10 and Link 20. Also, I feel Sony should have included an ambient light sensor so the LED display on the front will automatically adjust itself. I also think Sony should get more use out of the LED display in general. Right now, it only displays time and volume. I would really like to see it be used for timers, notifications, and maybe even display the current outside temperature. But still, I really do prefer the Sony LF-S50G over the original Google Home. Personally, I think the smart speaker is best suited for the kitchen. It looks good and it has a very small footprint. I just wish I could use that front display for my kitchen timers when I'm cooking. Since it sounds way better than the Google Home, I do find myself listening to music again while I'm cooking. If Google is working on a next-gen Google Home, they should take this concept and improve on it with better sound, the addition of a USB-C port so I have the option to charge my own device, and maybe a more useful display. Hey, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. It helps out more than you realize. For more product reviews and deal alerts, check out jimcaddy.net. If you want to support the channel, pick up a shirt. And I'll catch you next time.